environments conducive to peace and stability in order to sustain regional prosperity. In addition, Cambodia should raise agendas that are touchable and feel-able so that we can provide ASEAN citizens a strong sense of pride and hope. Between three pillars of ASEAN, such as political security community.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to draw your attention. Our program will commence shortly. Thank you. I would like to inform Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this morning agenda as follows. First, playing national anthem of Cambodia and Indonesia. Second, presenting Ha-Iben by Undip student. Third, presenting traditional peacock dance by Pusbudi Nusantara. Fourth, remark by co-host Mr. Martin H., Secretary of International Relations Study Program, Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University. Fifth, remarks by Mr. Sudirman Haseng, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of Cambodia. 6. Virtual photos. 7. Panel discussions. And last, Q&A. Of the Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of Cambodia. 6. Virtual photos. 7. Panel discussions. And last, Q&A. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the panel discussion with the theme of the foreign policy of Cambodia on bilateral and regional level, its impact and benefits for Indonesia and Asia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The foreign policy of Cambodia on bilateral and regional level. The Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of Cambodia has a great honor to have your excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, especially with the presence of our distinguished panelists and discussants. To Mr. Uit Leung, Acting Director of the Department of ASEAN, Africa and Middle East Studies of the International Relations Institute of Cambodia. Dr. Eddie Prasetyono, Department of International Relations, the University of Indonesia. Dr. Chiang Vanaret, President of Asian Vision Institute of Cambodia. And Ms. Shari Charlotte Patipoilohi, Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, Semarang, Indonesia. Please kindly stand up for the national anthem of Cambodia and Indonesia. Thank you. Please be seated. Now, we cordially invite Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to enjoy HI Band performed by University Diponegoro students.
Gokil. Gokil, Veta Anjay.
Imagine there's no heaven. I wonder if you try. And there's no hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And your religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. They say that all the dreamers, but I'm not the only one. Someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no position. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood and love. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You say that I'm the dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
Thank you for sharing and showing to us the beautiful performance. Please give applause to the beautiful performance. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome traditional dance performance from Central Java, namely Peacock Dance, performed by Pusbudi Nusantara. Thank you for another beautiful performance. Now, may I invite Mr. Martin H., Secretary of International Relations Study Program, Department of International Relations,
Martin.
University, to deliver his remarks.
Yo, Mr. Martin is in the house. Yeah. Where is
Thank
he?
you for MC to
What the fuck is he?
inviting me.
Where the fuck is he?
You can hear my voice?
Martin is in the house. Yeah, Mr. Martin is listening.
Hello? Can hear my voice?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Martin is in the house. Yo, yo,
No,
yo.
I'm in. Hello?
Yes, sir. We received
Okay.
it.
Okay, thank you for MC inviting me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to all of us. Salam Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Greeting of kindness. First, let me give my greetings beforehand. The Honorable Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to Cambodia, Bapak Sudirman Saseng. Selamat pagi, Bapak Sudirman. Apakah ada di tempat? The Honorable President at Asian Vision Institute Cambodia, Dr. Cheng Vanarit, Aaron Sode, the Honorable Acting Director of the Department of Asian, African, and Middle East Studies of the International Relations Institute of Cambodia, Mr. Oh Leang, Aaron Sude, Mr. Oh Leang, lecturer from Department of International Relations, the University of Indonesia, Bapak Dr. Edi Prasetyono. Selamat pagi, Bapak
Selamat
Edi.
pagi. Ya,
Baik.
thank you.
And my colleague from Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, Ibu Sari Charlotte Pati Pelohi. Selamat pagi, Ibu Sari.
Selamat pagi Pak Martin, selamat pagi Bapak Ibu semua.
The Honorable Minister, Counselor for Information and Socio-Cultural Affairs, Indonesian Embassy Phnom Penh, Ibu Lautinia Astri. Selamat pagi, Ibu Nia. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the presence of God Almighty, so that today we are all given health and strength in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, which hasn't ended yet. So we can meet at this event. On behalf of Diponegoro University, in particular the Department of International Relations, I would like to welcome the ambassador, speakers, and participants who attended from various institutions, both from Indonesia and Cambodia, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, in particular the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Phnom Penh. Also lecturers and students. This morning, here will be a panel discussion, which is collaboration between the Indonesian Embassy in Phnom Penh and the Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, with the topic, the foreign policy of Cambodia on bilateral and regional level, its impact and benefits for Indonesia and ASEAN. I would like to thank the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Phnom Penh for initiating this event and making the Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, a co-host, so that we can be involved in discussing the current situation in ASEAN, especially Cambodia and Indonesia's foreign policy. For us, the Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, with Cambodia is quite familiar because here is several student exchange programs between Diponegoro University and universities in Cambodia. Moreover, Diponegoro University also provides scholarship to students from Cambodia to continue their master program. However, the number of student exchange programs is not large enough. There are still less than 10 students. So it still needs to be increased. Furthermore, joint research and exchange of lecturers also need to be carried out to further improve understanding between the two countries, which have had long historical close relationships since 1957 and has done a lot of cooperation in various fields, especially in the fields of economy and trade. As an educational institution, we welcome this event because the issue of Cambodia's foreign policy is still rarely raised in the study of Southeast Asian studies in the discipline of international relations in Indonesia. The issue that is still popular and attracts a lot of attention among Indonesian academics is still about the dynamic situation in Myanmar. Even though there are many countries in Southeast Asia that are interesting to study, especially Cambodia. As friendly countries and strategic partners, the synergy of cooperation between Indonesia and Cambodia, I think, must be increased. Because in 2022, the two countries will become chairmen of international organizations. Indonesia will be the chair of the G20, while Cambodia will be the chair of ASEAN. So that collaboration between the two countries is expected to further advance the ASEAN region. And this event is expected to provide an overview of how Cambodia will become the chair of ASEAN and how it will affect the ASEAN region and Indonesia. This is my welcome on behalf of the Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University. Hopefully this event is useful for all of us. Thank you, Samakon.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for the speech. Now, I wish to invite His Excellency Mr. Sudirman Haseng, Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia, to deliver his remarks.
Dr. Pon Sok Tanja, the Advisor and Director, Department of Public Relations, National Institute of International Relations, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Excellency Kin Pie, Director General International Relations Institute of Cambodia, who I believe that is also joined the meeting through online. Pak Martin, Secretary of International Relations Program, Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, Central Java. Our distinguished panelist, Mr. Wit Liang. He is now acting director, the Department of ASEAN, African, and Middle East Studies, International Relations Institute of Cambodia, Royal Academy of Cambodia. Mr. Chiang Wanarit, PhD, the President of Asian Vision Institute, Kingdom of Cambodia. Pak Dr. Edi Prastiono, Lecturer, Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia.
Terima kasih.
Dan Ibu Charlie Carlotte Patipelhi. She is also lecturer, Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University. Distinguished guests and participants, very good morning to all of you. Selamat pagi, Cumripsu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
First and foremost, a very welcome to all of you who joined today's webinar discussion. I would like to express my deep appreciation and gratitude to Diponegoro University in Semarang City, Central Java, for working together with Indonesian Embassy in Phnom Penh to convene our discussion today. My highest appreciation also and gratitude to our panelists, both from Cambodia and Indonesia, who spare your precious time to share your invaluable knowledge with us today. Dear participants, history tells us that Indonesia and Cambodian relations rooted deeply, dated back during the ancient time as far as 8th, 9th century during the Kingdom of Medang or Mataram Kingdom of Central Java and the Kingdom of Sriwijaya in Sumatra with the Kingdom of Chenla and the Khmer Rouge. The long history of friendship has been forged from generation to generation and reinforced during our modern era through various meaningful cooperations, ranging from common strategic interests with regional and international fora to people-to-people contact. Indonesia recognized Cambodia as a sovereign nation in April 1955 during the first Asia-Africa Conference in Bandung, when Prince Norodom Sihanouk was present as the representative of his country. 4 years later, Indonesia and Cambodia established diplomatic relations on February 13, 1959. Since then, Indonesia-Cambodia relations have been brought into a new height. The relationship has been growing stronger and covers almost every aspect of cooperation and partnership. Among Indonesia's support for peace, stability, and development of the kingdom, where Indonesia's initiative of Jakarta Informal Meeting, first and second in 1988 and in 1989, that led to the Paris International Conference on October 23rd, 1991, co-hosted by Indonesia and France. Indonesia contributed troops for the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, or UNTAC, in 1992 and supported Cambodia's membership in ASEAN in 1999, and consistently provides capacity building for Cambodia's development. Capacity building for Indonesia development. Consistently provides capacity building for Cambodia's development. Indonesia and Cambodia also work closely on a range of common strategic interests in regional and international fora. As a country that has gone one step further, Indonesia also continues to help Cambodia by providing various scholarship programs from undergraduates to doctoral degree and providing empowerment training for Cambodian women. Indonesia also is committed to become Cambodia's development partners. Dear participants, until a couple of decades ago, Cambodia was identified as a country with civil war, foreign interference, mines, and explosive remnant of war. However, by the end of conflict and civil war, followed by reconciliation and integration, Cambodia has been growing to be a lower middle income country with an average annual GDP growth of 7%. Even the government has an ambition to make Cambodia a middle income country by 2030. Within the framework of ASEAN, in general, Cambodia focused most its foreign policy on ASEAN and ASEAN-led mechanisms such as the East Asia Summit. In economic field, the regional comprehensive economic partnership is an opportunity for Cambodia to maintain its growth, its economic growth. 21 years after joining ASEAN, Cambodia has many opportunities and achievements. In the field of politics and security, ASEAN becomes a platform for Cambodia to enhance political security and stability outward, supporting territorial integrity and sovereignty. Within the ASEAN economic community, Cambodia benefits from investment, trade, and human movement within the framework of mutual recognition arrangement. Cambodia's membership in ASEAN is beneficial for Cambodia and other members that increase intra-ASEAN trade and support economic growth. In the ASEAN social cultural community, the ASEAN University Network, where some universities in Cambodia are members, creates opportunities for joint research, joint degree programs, intra-ASEAN academic and student programs. Dear participants, It must be interesting to listen to our panelists, especially their insight about what Indonesia can reap from Cambodia's foreign policy after 6 decades of relationships, and how to position the roles of Indonesia and Cambodia in ASEAN. Equally interesting would be listening to the wisdom of our panelists about how Cambodia will direct its chairmanship in ASEAN in 2022 onto the strengthening ASEAN identity and what would be the focus of the Cambodian chairmanship. Finally, I would like to express my deep appreciations to the organizing committee, both from Diponegoro University and Indonesia Embassy in Phnom Penh, for their hard work and collaborations to make this program happen. I wish all participants have a productive discussion. Stay safe and stay healthy for everyone. Thank you. Terima kasih. Somakun.
Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mr. Sudirman Haseng, for the speech. Now, before we continue our panel discussions, may I ask Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for virtual photos. Please kindly turn on your cameras.
Sudah.
Please, everyone, kindly turn on your cameras.
Udahlah.
Okay, we start with the first slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you very much. As we have finished our opening, to lead the next session, I would like to invite Mrs. Laotinia Asri, Minister Counselor for Information and Socio-Cultural Affairs, Indonesian Embassy, Phnom Penh. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shelley. Excellency Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Sudirman Haseng, Ms. Sukmanya Phon, Director of Public Relations and Advisor to the National Institute of Diplomacy and International Relations of the Cambodia's MOFIC. Distinguished co-host of the event, Mr. Martin H. of the Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, Indonesia, of Central Java. Distinguished panelists and discussant, Dr. Edi Prasetyodo, Dr. Cheng Wanaret, Mr. Wit Liang, and Ms. Shari Charlotte Patipailohi. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen who attend the panel discussion directly in this room, and also who participate through Zoom and YouTube. Very good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Before we begin our discussion, allow me to remind to our online participants to kindly mute the speakers during panelist sessions. There will be a question and answer session after the discussion. Ms. Shari Patipailohi has finished her session. And to online participants who would like to ask question, you may type the question in the chat room or directly to us panelists later in the Q&A session. Thank you. Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Lautanya Asri. I'm a Minister Counselor for Information and Sociocultural in the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Phnom Penh. And as mentioned earlier, this event is a cooperation between the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Phnom Penh and the Department of International Relations of the Diponegoro University in Semarang, Central Java, Indonesia. This event is a part of our exercise to gain deeper understanding and knowledge from our expert here, particularly to the questions of what benefits can Indonesia reap from Cambodia's foreign policy and how to position the roles of Indonesia and Cambodia in ASEAN. Secondly, while on 2022, Cambodia will assume the chairmanship of ASEAN, how Cambodia will direct this chairmanship onto the strengthening of ASEAN identity, and what will be the focus of the Cambodia's chairmanship. And we would like to explore as well what Indonesia, which will assume the role of chairmanship of ASEAN after Cambodia, should focus on during its chairmanship in 2023. Okay, without further ado, allow me to invite our first panelist, Mr. Wit Leung, Acting Director of the Department of ASEAN, African and Middle East Studies of the International Relations Institute of Cambodia, Royal Academy of Cambodia, who will explain to us and present to us the focus of ASEAN chairmanship of Cambodia in 2022. But before he begins, let us put on the CV of Mr. Wit Leung on the screen so that the participants could also read. Mr. Wit Leung is currently pursuing his PhD in political science and with strong background in computer science, research and publication in ICT and politics. He is an expert of two words, of course. And his research interests are on social, computer science, energy, environment, and agriculture. His participation as organizer, participant, as well as speaker in various academic forums, conference, national and international, and workshop, as well as his background and experience as candidate from his bio describe his expertise in ICT and political science. Hence, is the right person to speak to our seminar or discussion panel today. So, Mr. Wit Leung, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yes, okay. Thank you. His Excellency Ambassador Saduman Hassan, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenary of the Region of Indonesia, of Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of Cambodia. Tadi Pastor Yano, the Department of International Relations of the University of Indonesia. Dr. Chik Bonrat, President of the ASEAN Vision Institute. Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my warmest thanks to His Excellency Saduman Hassan for inviting me to this important panel discussion. it is my pleasure and great honor to share with you my perspective on Cambodia ASEAN Chairmanship in 2022. The ASEAN vision as a concern of Southeast Asia nation toward living in peace, stability, and prosperity, bound together in partnership, in dynamic development, and in a community of caring society. Since Cambodia became a member of ASEAN in 1999, Cambodia already chaired ASEAN twice. The first in 2002 and second in 2012. And in 2022, Cambodia will chair again. The major challenge will be faced by Cambodia in the chairman in 2022 is COVID-19 that is not expected to lightly contain. However, Royal Government of Cambodia will try its best to chair ASEAN with certified outcome, all ASEAN member states in general, and for Cambodia in particular. The first thing we have to concern is what are the priorities for Cambodia in the chairmanship. Cambodia's success or failure depend on Cambodia in both domestic and external affairs, and will full participant of all relevant institutions and all components of Cambodia society by put national interest ahead. I expect that Cambodia will successfully, if face-to-face or online summit. For me, priority of preparation of Cambodia for now are vaccination and covering economic crisis caused by COVID-19. Vaccination is the first priority of Cambodia government, and being worked hard by government to purchase vaccine and vaccination committee to accelerate and speed up vaccine to Cambodia people and foreign to make sure that Cambodia is already to arrange ASEAN summit by offline or face-to-face is possible if other ASEAN member states also ready. Until today, Cambodia government provide vaccine COVID-19 more than 2 million, equal to more and nearly 30% of population in Cambodia, and for foreigner also. The second, foreign to recovery economic crisis after COVID-19. In this regard, the regional government of Cambodia has been prepared and launched the post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan 2020-2023 with the object to revive economic growth back to the growth potential with sustainable inclusiveness through ensuring peace, security, society stability, and public order on the path of the new normal, as well as enhance competitiveness and promote economic diversification, especially build strong industrial foundation with high export capacity and strong linkage to regional and global supply chain. For the challenge and opportunity of Cambodia in the chairmanship that will be upcoming, the ASEAN chairmanship can be both pride and pressure, both opportunity and challenge. But the first of all, what is the opportunity of Cambodia. Now it's time when we can proudly show that Cambodia now become a country that is actively integrating itself into regional and global structure and architecture, and has been actively playing an active role with equal right and equal footing in all regional and international affairs, and strictly adhere the participant of multilateralism. In this region, as well as the world, many traditional and non-traditional security enhanced emerging, such as rivalry between the superpower, the South China Sea issue, water issue in the Mekong region, COVID-19 pandemic, vaccination diplomacy issue, post-COVID-19 economic recovery, natural disaster, cybercrime, transportation crime, human trafficking, local harmless people, migrant worker, climate change, etc. will continue to become the increasingly complex challenge. All the issues have no bound or no boundary or spread responsibility of any single country, but they are the shared responsibility of the international community of which Cambodia is a part. Therefore, Cambodia's role as chair of ASEAN in 2022 is an opportunity for Cambodia to show its ability to jointly solving the above complex challenges. And another one for Cambodia to become the chairman of ASEAN in 2022. What should Cambodia prepare to raise those opportunities? In the chairmanship, Cambodia will have both opportunity and challenges also. In this sense, Cambodia must be well prepared both domestic and external to seize opportunity and overcome challenges. For domestic preparation, absolutely Cambodia belongs to all of us, not to the royal government or many single state institutions. Cambodia's success or failure is the responsibility of all of us, including all Cambodian citizens. In this sense, in the domestic aspect, it is ensured we have everyone on board taking the world of Cambodia, approach to get toward the undertaking of this historical chairmanship role by preparing human resource, material, budget, technology, security, protocol, and authority affairs, especially document work for submit and relation to meeting, seeing the most important work for this. At the same time, all political parties should have a common position on the objective and priority of national foreign affairs, policy for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national interest. Researcher institute, national think tank, as well as together also scholars should work with relevant institutions to provide strategy and policy recommendations so that Cambodia can reap the overwhelming benefit from chairmanship role. Both public and private media should promote widespread over the Cambodia's chairmanship role and disseminate factual information about the Cambodia to the public, both inside and outside country. Also, civil society organizations should contribute to promote the image of Cambodia as chair of ASEAN and to provide contribute recommendations to the regional government and relevant institutions. Finally, Cambodia citizens should take a part of the success of Cambodia by being prepared as active citizens with discipline, responsibility, and wisdom. For internal preparation, both regional and world are facing major challenges such as power rivalry, South China Sea issue, Mekong regional issue, along with the competition between the BRI and Indo-Pacific strategy. In this situation, Cambodia required to carry out the silent diplomacy and contribution to find common ground for regional cooperation among countries in the region so that ASEAN members do not fall apart. One side run to United States and other side run to China just for individual interests. That is the post agenda that bind ASEAN rather than the issue that divide ASEAN, especially to maintain the unity, solidarity, and literally of ASEAN. And to individual that ASEAN is the driving force in manage the power competition between China and US. That to maintain and manage condition, environment, conducive to peace and stability in order to sustain regional prosperity. In addition, Cambodia should raise agenda that can be touched and feelable so that we can provide ASEAN citizens a strong sense of pride and hope for the future and confidence for the well-being of generation to come with no one left behind, and also try to strike a balance between three parallel pillars of ASEAN, such as political security, community, economic community, and social culture community. On the crucial occasion, Cambodia should propose to establish an ASEAN control and coordination council, which act to an institution to monitor and evaluate the important implementation of ASEAN agreement, statement, and instrument, as ASEAN has signed countless agreements and documents. But yet, actual implementation seems to be limited. The ASEAN does not have a permanent mechanism with full mandate in this regard. At the same time, Council will act as a mechanism to mediate to solve international crisis of member state, dispute between the member state, and take peace and to curb interface from outside power. In connect to the political crisis in Myanmar, Indonesia is also play the important role in 24 April in special meeting in Jakarta. And Cambodia also by select Constantine also share the experience of win-win policy, try to contribute to solve the problem in Myanmar. When Cambodia Cambodia in chairmanship of ASEAN should set up the ad hoc task force to work with Myanmar conflict party quietly or through backdoor diplomacy to share lessons and experience of peace building and win-win policy implementation for Myanmar. It is also an opportunity to indicate that Cambodia has the ability to help resolve political crisis in the same ASEAN member state. I just remind a little bit about the win-win policy. I think everyone also know it's too long time ago. Win-win policy of some prime minister, my prime minister, just have three factors. The first is ensuring everyone with the right of life. The second, ensuring everyone with job and career for decent living, and the last, ensuring the protection of all their assets. And related to the Timor-Leste, regarding to the integration of Timor-Leste into ASEAN, the young government of Cambodia also declared that Cambodia welcome and support Timor-Leste to entry ASEAN as the last member state. And related to South China Sea dispute, we are confident that the young government of Cambodia will compromise all partners in the dispute to solve this dispute by bilateral and based on DOC in 2002 that was signed in Phnom Penh. Cambodia should contribute to strategically diversify its diplomacy, support the principle of multilateralism, maintain close ties with all major powers, strengthen the important role of ASEAN by adhering to principle of rule-based international relations, and promote peace through dialogue and negotiation. Cambodia should take an absolute neutral stand on international conflict and sovereignty. And the last but not least, from preparedness of ASEAN Chairmanship 2022, we expect that we'll continue to talk about such as issue for our community. Also, the ASEAN political security, we should be continue to talk about superpower liberal ASEAN central and neutrally, about maritime security, ASEAN regional mine action center, ASEAN community post 2025 vision, and with ASEAN economic community, we should talk about ASEAN comprehensive regional framework and its implementation plan, and regional comprehensive economic partnership also. And related to social culture in ASEAN, we should talk about COVID-19 is a vaccine multilateralism. And the last is migrant worker. On behalf of the, not on behalf, at the ASEAN 2020, Cambodia is the chair of ASEAN. I think those of issue will be continue to talk and discuss to get more result and can help all the country in the ASEAN with the peace and stability. And the last one is Cambodia will prepare for the ad hoc issue if have any problem. I think it enough time for me. So thank you for discussion, and thank you and waiting for the question. So thank you so much for kind attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitling, for your presentation. So Mr. Whitling has presented before us the challenges and opportunities during Cambodia's chairmanship in ASEAN in 2022, and also he touched upon 3 pillars of the ASEAN community, and as well as what ASEAN community should do post 2025. So our second panelist is Dr. Edi Prasetyono from the Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia. Dr. Edi will discuss on the positioning ASEAN chairmanship from the Indonesia's perspective. So before we begin with the presentation, let me also read his short CV. Dr. Edi Prasetyono is senior lecturer at the Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia in Jakarta. He's also executive director of Center for ASEAN Studies, Universitas Indonesia. Dr. Edi Prasetyono obtained his master and doctoral degree in security studies from the University of Birmingham, UK. He has vast experiences in security and defense studies, and I was a visiting lecturer at Naval Staff College, Air Force and Joint Staff College. And for his dedication in the military education, he was awarded Satya Lencana Dwidya Sista medals from Chief of the Indonesian Navy, Chief of the Indonesian Armed Forces, and from the President of the Republic of Indonesia in 2012. So without further ado, Dr. Edi, the floor is yours.
Very good morning. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your nice introductions. And of course, I would like to thanks to the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia, especially the Excellency Ambassador, Bapak Sudirman Haseng, and also, my colleagues from the University of Diponegoro and my colleagues from Cambodia, from the International Relations Institute of Cambodia, and also from the ASEAN Vision of the Cambodia. So I was asked by the organizer to talk about positioning ASEAN chairmanship, ASEAN perspective, and I do believe that this topic is very interesting, and we can have more discussion after my presentation. Before I start, with this topic, let me outline the characteristic of the Southeast Asian region, or the region surrounding us. If we look at the recent developments, over the past, say, 2 years or 3 years, and especially, after the region was hit, actually, it's not only in the region, but the world, actually hit by the COVID-19. We have seen that a lot of international organizations and also regional organizations, and even United States, they have demonstrated, the so-called lack of leadership. Countries or states, become much more nationalism, and we have seen, the emerging of the realignments of the states, in particular regions. And I have talked to some people, how some countries are very disappointed by, the alliance. For example, our neighbors in southern part of this world, is Australia. For example, they complain, about being banned by the European Union, on vaccine for COVID-19. And also, China has become, very dominant in terms of, they got some advantages in the vaccine diplomacy, over the past few months. And that's what I called, realignments, caused by the COVID-19. But if we go back to our region, I think there are 4 characteristics. The first one is we are still, actually, we have been watching the so-called regional geopolitical rivalry, and I think it's become much more intensified, and especially because of the issue of the South China Sea, and also the competition between China and United States. And in fact, if we look at the changes in the government of the US, Joe Biden have appeared to be actually more subtle, is more sophisticated, in their diplomacy, against China. Trump is very blunt, black and white. But Biden, I think, have come up with much more, instruments. For example, in the case of South China Sea, United States is very committed now to conducting the so-called freedom of navigation operation, and it's not going to be, conducted, with just one or two ships, but it is a how do you call it? Strike groups, freedom of navigation operation, and they also invited some countries to do the so-called independent freedom of navigation. They have also encouraged some ASEAN countries to be much more assertive, to challenge the so-called China unilateral claim over South China Sea, and so on and so forth. So basically, regional geopolitical rivalry is still and has been intensified. The second characteristic of the regions, which also actually put some pressures on ASEAN, is the so-called military build-up. If you look at, I don't come up with the data, because data we can see actually at the IISS in London, it's published by London, and also some of the defense white books published by each country in the region. We can see that the defense spending in this part of the world actually is double compared with the defense spending in the Middle East. Although there has been no war actually since the so-called Vietnam War in 1975, but the defense spending in this particular part of the world is really, very, very big. The China spending to 210 billion US dollars, Japan 60 billion US dollars, Australia, and so on and so forth, with the emphasis on naval and air force. So basically, we are watching the so-called militarization of the region. And thirdly, territorial dispute is still there. It's not only regional dispute, but also bilateral dispute. And sometimes, among ASEAN countries, they put it under the table. Territorial dispute has also, become the homework of ASEAN. We have achieved the so-called document of conduct, and now we are still negotiating the COC, Code of Conduct, on the South China Sea. It is not easy process, because sometimes, ASEAN is under pressure. In the past, it was the Western countries like Australia, and then the allies, United States, Japan, they're really eager, to conclude the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea. But it's no longer the story. Now they try to hold, the process, with some fear that the Code of Conduct actually, will give some advantages to China. And one of the advantages, or one of the fears, that they have in their mind, is that the Code of Conduct will create a specific arrangements, or naval arrangements, or maritime arrangement in the South China Sea that potentially go against the so-called UNCLOS. So that's why they ask ASEAN to be very careful about the Code of Conduct. And I do hope, of course, we continue the negotiation, and and it is, of course, the homework of Cambodia and also the next chairmanship. Fourthly, we have been watching the so-called overlapping complex regionalism. And if we look at the list of regional cooperation or regional arrangements in this part of the world, especially in the Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific, which is now called Indo-Pacific, there are so many regional cooperation, not only in economic realm, but also in security and defense. And all of the ASEAN initiative, for example, ARF, ASEAN Maritime Forum, ASEAN Defense Ministerial Forum, and all of them, has been matched in parallel with the similar initiatives, similar arrangements, put forward by extra-regional countries. For example, we have now, we already had the so-called ASEAN Maritime Forum, and then the other countries, especially external power, they have the so-called Cargo Security Initiative. We have ASEAN Defense Ministerial Meeting, and then extra-regional countries, they have the so-called Shangri-La Dialogue, and so on and so forth. So basically, this shows that the so-called ASEAN is just like a very sexy girl. It is very interesting, and the data about the importance of ASEAN, can be seen from various statistics. For example, 1/3 of the world trade actually passed through the ASEAN water or water in this region, or 90%, 85% of the oil supply from the Middle East to eastern part of Asia or East Asia, pass through the waters in Southeast Asia. So this is a very big, and ASEAN, is very important and will be, will remain important in the future. So that is basically, the strategic environment surrounding the countries. And of course, we have seen a lot of other issues. For example, the diseases, COVID, pandemic, and of course, RCEP is also very important. But of course, we still need to invite India. India very reluctant to join RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, with the reasons that it endanger the so-called domestic industry, domestic products, or domestic market in India. So that is the strategic environment that actually we are facing now. Now, what is the significance of the ASEAN chairman? And I think if we learn from the past experience, Indonesia has been, of course, several times become the ASEAN chairman. And I still remember how Indonesia took initiative, and after the end of the Cold War, and also in the early 2000, when Indonesia initiated the so-called ASEAN community that was then launched, in Bali at that time. Basically, ASEAN chairman, has a function or has plays role as spokesperson for ASEAN members, and it is very important because it is about the diplomacy. It is about how to convince the others, how to represent, the ASEAN members on behalf of ASEAN. So, so I do hope, of course, and I believe that Cambodia and also the next ASEAN chairman, will be able to play this role, and it's also at the same time is very strategic one. Secondly, is ASEAN chairman is facilitating and chairing official meetings, and by this role, it means that basically we are demanded to have some capacities, some capabilities. For example, that we need to have strong infrastructures, to hold some meeting, to prepare, and also, of course, the capacity of the diplomats, to facilitate and chair some of the official meetings, that will be, held by ASEAN. So it's basically preparing infrastructure, and the capacity of the diplomat. Thirdly, taking new initiative and agenda for regional cooperation. And of course, sometimes we are, faced, with unprecedented and predictable situations. For example, in the case of COVID-19, this is actually really very serious issues, and we need to take, or launch the so-called regional cooperation. For example, in the productions and the distribution of vaccine, collaboration in the medical research, and so on and so forth. Who is going to take initiative in this part of, or in this particular field? And I think we need to be, we need to respect. We have to, appreciate very much when ASEAN come up with a special fund, for the disease and the pandemic, as has been seen, over the past. I think it started last year. And fourthly, ASEAN Summit is also demanded to be able to play a role as a consensus builder. As we have seen, the pressures is there. The differences in the interests and the perspective are also there. So the ASEAN chairman need to be able, to make a compromise, need to be able to convince, how to come up, with the consensus ideas, with the consensual stance, on the particular issues. So it's basically required, what I call the leadership. Yeah, and this is basically leadership. And also my fifth point, able to stand up against any negative coalition of states in the region. So it's basically how to prevent the divisions of ASEAN, to mobilize the support, and also to convince the others, that ASEAN need to be, in one voice, in unity. So that's why, as I said here, this is about a leadership credential. So almost every ASEAN countries, they have the experience, in chairing ASEAN. But of course, the challenges and also the future and the directions of these regions, will be different, will be face, a different situation. So now, what is the challenges? If we look at the developments in ASEAN, especially when Cambodia was chairing ASEAN in 2005, and at that time, for the first time, ASEAN failed to issue a joint declarations on particular issues. And since then, a lot of observers, a lot of researchers, and also policymakers, begin to think that basically ASEAN consensus, ASEAN declarations, ASEAN statement, as I wrote here, now cannot longer be taken for granted, in the sense that it is not as easy as it was in the past. It needs special efforts, to get the consensus, because of the intensifying, and differences among the ASEAN countries, and from the academic point of view, since the very beginning, we already reminded that the pressures and also the temptations, from the external powers, is there, and that's why ASEAN need to be, be careful, about all of this. Secondly, being a chairman of ASEAN, we are required to be able to strike the balance between national interest and that of association and the pressure of external powers, in the sense that, and sometimes national interest can be different, from in the interest of the association. So now the problem is how to strike the balance. If we too much pro-external powers, if we bow to the so-called external pressures, then ASEAN, will lose credibility. If we advance our national interest, goes beyond the association of interest, ASEAN will also, face the same challenge. So it is basically the balancing, between national interest and the interest of the association, and the pressure of external powers. It's not easy, actually, to strike the balance between those, three factors. Too much giving, how do you call it, accommodate, the interest of particular power, will also actually, put ASEAN, in the question, the big questions of neutrality, the big questions of ASEAN as the leader of the regionalisms, in this region. Thirdly, how to maintain ASEAN-driven regionalism. As I said before, in the previous slides, there is no single ASEAN initiative, there is not match, there is not parallel, there is not challenge, by similar initiative, by external powers. So that's why, the interest, the issue, the agenda, the issue, discussed by ASEAN, and sometimes is also challenged, by the interest of the other powers. For example, we do not want to much actually put in the burdens of discussing, the so-called North Korea issues. When we try to invite India and Pakistan, to become a partner of ASEAN, a long time ago, we fear that the ASEAN agenda, will be dominated by, the conflict between Pakistan and India. When United States, declared the so-called war on terrorism, we also very much concerned, whether ASEAN is going to be dictated by United States, in terms of agenda setting, and so on and so forth. So maintaining ASEAN-driven regionalism is always there, and the roles of the ASEAN chair, will be very important, very comprehensive in reading the situation, in observing the situation. So this is basically, the classical issues, that are faced by ASEAN, in many years. It's not only in the past, but also in the future. Now, the new issues. New issues is of course is always upon the question of ASEAN capacities, relevance, and legitimacy. Just like in the case of Myanmar, for example, we in Indonesia also discuss a lot about Myanmar, and at the same times, people who has been very skeptical to ASEAN, they come up with the question is, what is the significance, what is the function, what is the relevance of ASEAN, in the face of the Myanmar issues. If you look at, for example, with the constitution of African Union, I compare with African Union. There is an article, in their constitution, what I call it constitution. Yeah, in the constitution, if there is the so-called undemocratic changes of the national government, then their membership in the association, will be frozen by the association. Can we do that in ASEAN? If we look at the what is that? I forgot actually the document, but one of the document, I think the plan of action in political security community. Yeah, there is a statement there. There are wordings there that ASEAN should condone. It's very important. Should not condone the undemocratic changes of the national government, and it is very clear in that. So if we look at what happened in Myanmar, then there are a lot of questions put forward by many people, observers, as I said before, researchers. Yeah, that ASEAN need to be more assertive. But thanks to Indonesia leadership. At that time, we come up with a summit, special summit, and we come up with 5 points. And now the tasks of the ASEAN, as stated by point number, if I'm not mistaken, point number 3 or 5, the appointment of special envoy, and special envoy, will visit Myanmar and to have to facilitate the so-called dialogues, among the parties, in Myanmar. So what is the homeworks? Of course, if we look at all of the issues, we will, come up with very long list of issues. But here, I try to highlight, just 3 issues. The first one is how to deal with potential next pandemic. There's some lesson from COVID-19. There are some ideas now, and the ASEAN should have the special arrangement, regional arrangements on the productions and the distributions of vaccines. With, of course, if possible, we establish the so-called the hub of how to fight against the pandemic. And I think the pandemic is not going to be over very soon, and also we need to anticipate the next one, because now the range, the timelines of the pandemic becoming much shorter compared with, say, 2 or 3 decades ago. So we need to establish what I called regional mechanisms, especially in the productions and distributions of the vaccine and other medicines, to prepare ourselves to fight the next pandemic. Secondly is ASEAN has already launched the so-called ASEAN Outlook of Indo-Pacific. But the problem here is a lot of criticism said that this is still on paper. And now the problem is how ASEAN is going to translate it into a concrete cooperations. And especially if we look at what I call in security and defense, we are facing now the progress and the developments of Indo-Pacific US version, what they call it Quad, and Quad is becoming stronger, is more solid now compared with it was, say, 3 or 5 years ago. And under the Joe Biden, the Quad has already held the first summit, and they have a regular military exercise. They call it Malabar exercise, with the participants, of course, from the US, Japan, and then Australia and India. And it seems that Malabar is the embryo of Quad, and Quad is the main pillar, the most fundamental, the most vital pillar of the Indo-Pacific and the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific, and launched by United States, and of course with the full support, from Japan. And also, so now actually, we are watching. We are now in the situation that the 2 Indo-Pacific, how do you call it, projects, now in progress. So that's why during the recent visit, by the Undersecretary Wendy Sherman to Jakarta, and I'm not mistaken, also to Cambodia, Wendy Sherman said that ASEAN need not to see the free and open Indo-Pacific Quad and Malabar and so on and so forth as a competitor to ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific. This is, of course, diplomatic gesture. This is, of course, diplomatic statement. As academician, what we need to see, what is the value, what is the importance of this statement is they are going to go alone. whether you like it or not, whether ASEAN like it or not, they will have their own versions of Indo-Pacific, yeah, which is very much security heavy. So that's why, if it's not security heavy, why United States needed to change Asia Pacific Command or PACOM Pacific Command, to change it into the so-called Indo-Pacific Command. So that means this is really, really serious issue. This is really serious project from the US. And now we are, we are living in these two situations. So the chairmanship of Cambodia, I do believe that Cambodia, will be able to do his homeworks. And Cambodia also able to communicate, it's not only with Indonesia, but also with the rest of ASEAN, and especially, of course, with the connection and close relation with China, Cambodia will be able, to, how do you call it, to find the tune, to strike the balance, between all of this one. Yeah. And thirdly, as I said before, South China Sea and COC will be a challenge, but at the same time, this is actually an opportunity, to be honest. Yeah, because South China Sea is, to China, is basically a test of diplomacy, as a new superpower. So that's why, everything is put there. It is a really big stake. To US, South China Sea is also basically, a test of their diplomacy, in facing, the new superpower, and ASEAN is really caught in the middle. ASEAN is really in the middle. So COC is our big project in the future, and of course it will be, prepared, by Cambodia, and then, in the next one by Indonesia. So that's why I'm looking forward, actually, to have much more coordination, much more understanding about some fundamental issues in the region, whoever, the chairman of the ASEAN. So with that, I conclude my presentation, Madam Chair. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Edi Prasetyono, for your comprehensive yet interesting perspective on the issue of the homework for ASEAN chairman, both for Cambodia as well as Indonesia in 2022 and 2023, against the changing of geostrategic landscape in the region. So our last panelist is Dr. Chiang Vanaret, President of the ASEAN Vision Institute. Allow me first to read Dr. Vanaret's CVs before we commence his session. Dr. Chiang Vanaret is a public policy analyst and a government relations strategist. He has over a decade of research experiences in geopolitical and political economic analysis, with a focus on Southeast Asia. He is currently serving as president of the ASEAN Vision Institute, or AVI, where he leads projects on geopolitical risk analysis, regional security, smart village development, inclusive digital economy, and leadership development. He was honored a Young Global Leader by World Economic Forum in 2013, and Southeast Asia Young Leaders by the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2016. Dr. Vanaret received his doctoral degree in Asia Pacific Studies from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in Japan. So Dr. Vanaret will discuss past, present, and the future direction of bilateral relations between Indonesia and Cambodia. So Dr. Vanaret, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Allow me to express my sincere gratitude to the Embassy of Indonesia for the kind invitations. Excellency Ambassador Sudirman Hussain, Indonesian Ambassador to Cambodia, Mr. Martin, Secretary of International Study Program, Department of International Relations, Diponegoro University, Indonesia, fellow distinguished panelists, their participants. I would like to share my perspective on Cambodia foreign policy first, then move on to Cambodia-Indonesia relations. Cambodia foreign policy has been evolved quite dynamically over the past 5 years with the new leadership. We can see more of this kind of process of consultation with think tank communities and so on. So that is very positive development that Cambodia foreign policy have been not only inclusive externally, but also inclusive internally. So multi-stakeholder dialogue and discussions and open to different opinions and views. There are four pillars from my perspective of the Cambodia foreign policy. First pillar is to build on independent nations. So because independence, non-alignment, and neutrality are the core principle of Cambodia foreign policy, which very much shared by Indonesia when it comes to the core principles. So independent nations refers to nations that can exercise its agency, a strategic autonomy in the international system. A second pillar of Cambodia foreign policy is to build a prosperous nations. So a prosperous nation here refers to the capacity of the state to provide equal opportunities to the people, to its citizens, and optimizing its natural resources, managing it in a very sustainable and inclusive manner, and of course the capacity to transform international environment into a source of national development. So in this case, economic diplomacy, which has been issued early this year, have become one of the key priorities of Cambodian foreign policy. So Cambodian foreign policy is about economic interests. Third pillar, to build a smart nations. In a few weeks' time, you will receive our digital economy framework. It has been released in Khmer language, but in English language by the end of this month. So that is a significant kind of a policy guideline to promote digital transformation in Cambodia to build a smart nation. So it has three pillars: to build a smart or digital government, to build digital businesses and economy, and also to build digital citizens. So digital transformation here is very critical for the future of Cambodia economy, and foreign policy have been developed to serve the digital transformation in Cambodia, especially when it comes to digital diplomacy and cyber diplomacy. Last but not least is to build a resilient nations. The concept of resilient have been become popular within the context of COVID-19. So we came to realize how important it is to build a resilient community and resilient nations in order to build our capacity to adapt to crisis, to bounce back faster and stronger from the crisis. So that is very important institutional capacity of a nation, and foreign policy need to diversify the sources of economic partners, strategic partners, sources of growth in general, because diversification and hedging strategy are very critical to build a resilient nations. So those are the four pillars of Cambodia foreign policy. And the previous two speakers mentioned about the Cambodian chairmanship next year. It will be a milestone in the ASEAN history and also Cambodian foreign policy history, because 2022 will be a critical year with the context of post-COVID socio-economic recovery. So building a resilient ASEAN is very critical as a chair next year. How to bounce back stronger, cleaner, and better. Right? Second is, I think Professor Eddie mentioned about the challenges stemming from geopolitical rivalries, and Dr. Wu Liang also stressed that. And I would like here to refer to the importance of the Asian outlook of Indo-Pacific that we adopted a few years ago. And I think it's time for us to review and to activate it and operationalize it. Cambodia and others believe that the AOIP is a critical strategic instrument to navigate ASEAN through this uncertain, challenging geopolitical water in the Indo-Pacific. So that is one of the key areas perhaps we can push forward. And of course, after Cambodia will be Indonesia as the chair of ASEAN. So Indonesia perhaps can carry on this operationalizing the AOIP when it take over the chairmanship in 2022. So it will be a long-term process when it comes to navigating ASEAN through geopolitical rivalries. So, but as long as we stay together, stay united, act as one voice, then I think together we can thrive and be prosperous as a region. So now moving to Cambodia-Indonesia bilateral relations, as Ambassador mentioned in his opening remarks, this is a time-honored tradition of friendship between the two countries. And he also highlighted the very critical, vital role of Indonesia in the peacemaking, peacekeeping and peace-building process in Cambodia in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So this is something that we need to remember, and we need to register historical role of Indonesia and Cambodia. And that's why we should have some symbol in order to recognize Indonesia in Cambodia. So some have proposed perhaps we should have the street name carrying the name of the former leaders of Indonesia, for instance, or any symbol that our two countries can celebrate and to remember our traditional friendship and partnership. Look at the current state of relationship. I would say that it is very good because very comprehensive in a way. And Ambassador mentioned earlier that Indonesia wishes to become one of the key development partners of Cambodia in terms of trade, investments, and other areas of operations. So look at the trade and investment. We still have kind of a low level of trade kind of volumes. The total trade volume, for instance, in 2019 it was about 800 millions. It's dropped to about 700 millions last year. So that's something that I think we have a room to expand when it comes to bilateral trade cooperation, and try to find certain products that we can complement each other in this regional supply chain or production network. In terms of defense cooperation, I must say that it is very vibrant. That in terms of defense cooperation, and after the agreement that signed in 2017 and the MOU on military training 2016, we can see a kind of a series, numbers of capacity building and trainings, especially for the Cambodian kind of bodyguard unit of the Prime Minister and also other armed forces of Cambodia. So the quality of the bodyguard unit in Cambodia pretty much rely on the quality of training in Indonesia. When it comes to cultural cooperation, I think it's also another vibrant cooperation area. Ambassador also mentioned our kind of cultural connectivity or cultural link between Borobudur and Angkor Wat and others. So this is something that I think we can explore when it comes to the cultural corridor development, civilizational connectivity between Indonesia and Cambodia. Again, the tourism exchange should be further promoted based on this heritage sites connectivity. So we should help each other to promote our cultural heritage sites between the two countries. In terms of regional context, I echo the statement by previous speakers that Indonesia play a leading role in ASEAN and other regional kind of integration projects initiatives. So and Cambodia truly respect the leadership role of Indonesia. And in this case, we need to remember the Indonesian role when it was the chair of ASEAN in 2011, that Indonesia was very active in helping to mediate the border conflict between Cambodia and Thailand. Remember 2008, when Singapore was the chair, Cambodia approached, but Singapore did not really offer full support and to the Cambodia-Thailand border conflict. But again, when the conflict erupted, 2011, the Indonesian offered a very critical support, even offering to send peacekeeping forces or observers, observer to the disputed area. So this is again the leadership role of Indonesia. And 2012, remember that ASEAN for the first time in its 45 years history failed to issue a joint communique. But thanks to Indonesia at that time, through the subtle diplomacy of the former Prime Minister Netalagawa, Martin Netalagawa, ASEAN could come up with a 6-point statement on the South China Sea. Yeah. Again, this is to save the future of ASEAN, to overcome this kind of deadlock. And of course, Cambodia was willing at the time to support the 6-point statements. So that is Cambodia interest and position on the South China Sea. So if you refer to the 6-point statement, that reflect the Cambodian policy on the South China Sea. So some accusation that Cambodia destroyed unity of ASEAN is quite exaggerated, because if Cambodia have intention to block South China Sea, Cambodia would not accept the 6-point statement that moderated by Indonesia. So we need to see it from a bigger perspective of Cambodian foreign policy and position on the South China Sea. Again, when it comes to the ongoing political crisis in Myanmar, Indonesia again took a leadership role. Even though Brunei is the chair of ASEAN this year, but it's quite low key and it's not kind of so keen to push the agenda. But saying again to Indonesia, I think ASEAN have come up with special summit and a 5-point statement on Myanmar issues. And this issue will be a bit kind of medium or even long-term issue. So I think it takes a lot of time and resources, and Cambodia and Indonesia can work together, because next year Cambodia will be the chair of ASEAN. So we looking forward to cooperate closely with other ASEAN member states, especially Indonesia, when it comes to the political settlement or mediation in Myanmar. And of course, when it comes to the South China Sea, I think the previous speaker mentioned about the COC. It has been delayed quite a bit due to the COVID-19. But I think we have shared a strong political will and commitment to have an early conclusion of the COC, because it will be a very important legal document. We push for it will become a legal document, so that we can shape the behavior of the claimant state and also other states that involved in the South China Sea, so that it then become the sea of peace, prosperity in the region. So again, it's the role of ASEAN working closely with China to conclude it, hopefully during the Cambodian chairmanship next year, because it will mark the 20th anniversary of the DOC. So it took 20 years for ASEAN China to negotiate the COC. So it is a painful, long-term process, but it worthwhile process, because it is a matter of trust building, confidence building. As long as we still talk to each other, I think we can find a way out from this. So to conclude, I would like to again to stress the role, responsible and leadership role of Indonesia in the region, and the importance of the bilateral relationship between Cambodia and Indonesia in promoting the interests of both nations, also the interests of ASEAN. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Banaret, for your enlightenment on the issue of the importance of bilateral relations of Indonesia and Cambodia in the various fields, as well as how, and you also touch upon the ASEAN chairmanship and the importance of a chairman of what ASEAN chairman should do during its chairmanship. So now we will have our discussion. Ms. Shari Charlotte Petty Pailohi of the Diponegoro University. And before we begin the session, I would like to also read her short bio as well. Ibu Shari is a lecturer of International Relations, University of Diponegoro. She received her master's degree from Gajah Mada University of Yogyakarta in 2013. Her research interests are, among other, gender in international relations, gender in conflict resolutions, and peace and conflict studies. So, Ibu Shari, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator, Mrs. Lautenia, and thank you for all the panelists, Mr. Chang Panarit, Mr. Whitliang, and Mr. Eddie Prasetyono. Forgive me if I make mistake in pronouncing your name. It is a real honor and privilege, especially after such an impressive presentation made by all the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Shari Charlotte, and today I am here as a discussant, and I will provide a synthesis related to the discussion that has been carried out by all the panelists, and also provide a few comments regarding the discussion. You can see at the screen before that the purpose of this panel discussion is to answer 4 basic questions regarding the future of foreign policy, both bilateral and multilateral in Indonesia, Cambodia, and ASEAN. Those questions are: first, what is the benefits for Indonesia in 6 decades of Indonesia-Cambodia bilateral relations and Cambodia foreign policy? The second, what is the roles and positions of Indonesia and Cambodia in ASEAN? Third, while on 2022, Cambodia will assume the chairmanship of ASEAN, how Cambodia will direct this chairmanship onto the strengthening of ASEAN identity? And the fourth is, what will be the focus of the Cambodia chairmanship? After all the panelists present their materials, I have synthesized it to answer those questions. To answer number 1 regarding the Indonesia-Cambodia cooperation, I understand that Indonesia and Cambodia has many cooperative efforts, especially through the JCBC or Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation, both in the political, security, economic, and cultural sectors. This cooperation has begun from the ancient time between the Kingdom of Indonesia and Cambodia. And in political security cooperation lately, I saw that actually both Indonesia and Cambodia cooperation in defense and security has been initiated since 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. The memorandum of understanding between the Indonesian National Army and the Army of the Royal Cambodian Armed Force, or RCAF, on army-to-army talk was signed in Cambodia in December 2007. The Tentara Nasional Indonesia, or the Army of Indonesia, has continuously provided training assistance to the Royal Cambodia Armed Force, or RCAF, in particular 911 Brigade and the Prime Minister's Security Forces, and in the form of education and training. And then we have MOU on military training in 2016 and agreement on defense cooperation in 2017. Indonesia and Cambodia have also maintained the cultural and social diplomacy, such as scholarship for students from both countries. the cultural heritage cooperation. And also, I just found out that there are roads in Cambodia called Sukarno and Ali Alatas. Thank you very much for giving appreciation to Indonesian patriots. And I also remember that during 1970s, Cambodia experienced an interstate conflict between Cambodia and Vietnam. And the resolution of the Cambodia conflict was initiated by Indonesia, which carried out shuttle diplomacy between Vietnam and Cambodia, then facilitated their meeting at the Jakarta Informal Meeting, or JIM. The Indonesian foreign minister who played an important role in efforts to resolve the conflict in Cambodia was Ali Alatas in 1988 and 1989. And JIM succeeded in producing a ceasefire between the two sides and withdrew Vietnamese troops from the Cambodian border. And maybe that is why the name Ali Alatas is used as a street name in Cambodia. And the result of GIM were then followed by the Paris Peace Agreement, which was approved by 19 countries, including Cambodia and Vietnam. This ended the civil war between Vietnam and Cambodia. Even though it looks fine, we need to understand that the relations between Indonesia and Cambodia are not always smooth. Relations between the two countries once disconnected in 1975, because we remember that the Khmer Rouge established the Democratic Kampuchea to replace the Khmer Republic. And the foreign policy of the Pol Pot regime was a policy of self-imposed isolation. And that is why Cambodia cut its bilateral relation with almost all countries, including Indonesia. And we also have to keep in mind that 1975 is a tough year for Southeast Asian nations because many conflicts start in this particular year. For example, war in Vietnam and Cambodia, conflict between Indonesia and Timor or East Timor, insurgency in southern Thailand and Philippines, all happens in that particular year, 1975. And then in 1988, as previously mentioned, Indonesia was one of the parties to stop the war between Vietnam and Cambodia. Then in 2011, when Indonesia became chairman of ASEAN, Indonesia helped to resolve the conflict between Cambodia and Thailand that had been heating up since 2008 over the Preah Vihear temple. And then what are the predictions for Indonesian and Cambodia relations in the future? What issues can strengthen or worsen relations between the two countries? That is what we might be able to use as a material for discussion in the Q&A session. Next is answer number 2 regarding the roles and positions of Cambodia in ASEAN. Cambodia's biggest contribution to ASEAN was when Cambodia became the chair of ASEAN in 2002 and 2012. This can also show the direction of Cambodia's foreign policy in ASEAN in 2022. To make this discussion easier, I divided it into 3 different sectors. The first is political, the second is economic, and the third is social sectors. In the political sectors, I see that Cambodia has a serious role and view on the South China Sea dispute since 2002 and the crisis in Myanmar in 2021. In 2012, Cambodia caused controversy regarding its decision not to include the issue of South China Sea dispute on the ASEAN agenda, as requested earlier by Thailand and the Philippines. In the economic sector, Cambodia also have established the ARMAC and RECP. And in social sectors, the joint statement on drug-free ASEAN and ASEAN Human Rights Statement, or AHRD, in 2012. And next is to answer the question number 3, Cambodia chairmanship in 2022 onto the strengthening of ASEAN identity, both internally and externally. From this discussion, we understand that Cambodia has a significant compliance to the ASEAN way, which based on 4 principles: the non-interference, quiet diplomacy, the non-use of force, and the decision-making through consensus. And externally, Cambodia will also try to navigate ASEAN through geopolitical rivalries operationalized by the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and also peaceful solution to the political crisis in Myanmar and UN peacekeeping operations. And to answer question number 4, the focus of the Cambodia's chairmanship. The focus of Cambodia chairmanship will be the promoting global governance aimed at strengthening the multilateral system, fighting climate change, and in the short term, I think reviving the economy after the COVID-19 crisis will remain Cambodia's priority toward ASEAN. The purpose of this agenda is to encourage economic development and increase financial resilience and continue to reduce the potential global economic deficit to a minimum. How ASEAN can handle COVID problems in all ASEAN countries and regional mechanism to suppress the spread of COVID among ASEAN countries, and also the production and vaccination of all ASEAN citizens, especially regarding the new mutation of COVID-19 in Southeast Asia. So lastly, I would like to synthesize the threats and vulnerabilities that Indonesia and Cambodia face through ASEAN security. The first is we understand that the first threats of ASEAN threats come outside ASEAN, and the vulnerabilities is coming inside the ASEAN. This is the very Busan theories on security. On outside the ASEAN, we understand that ASEAN face geopolitical security. Today, ASEAN is facing a great challenge amid the strategic competition for influence in the Asia Pacific between the United States and China. And recently, countries in Southeast Asia have been forced to choose sides, United States or China. As the United States and China increase their strategic rivalry and start a new Cold War, ASEAN is locked up in a strategic tug of war that could destabilize the whole region if it fails to navigate the geopolitical challenge effectively. And next is the vulnerability inside ASEAN. We understand that inside ASEAN, we show ASEAN countries tend to have divergent interests and priorities. Each member faces their own unique social, economic, and political challenges. As a result, each seem to have no choice but focus on addressing their own internal affairs, that Mr. Eddie already said before. That this emphasis on domestic affairs will definitely affect the well-being of ASEAN as a whole. So it is important for Indonesia and Cambodia to make a good balance between national interests and the agenda of ASEAN. Another key challenges faced by the ASEAN is corruption, demographic changes, uneven social development, disparities in economic development, and technological adoption, cybersecurity, environmental degradation, and other issues related to politics and the rise of authoritarianism are challenges also for the ASEAN. So what would Indonesia and Cambodia do to maintain the existence and significance of ASEAN in promoting peace and security in all Southeast Asian members? This question can be another discussion for all the audience and participants to bring their questions inside the Q&A session. That is all my discussion material, Mrs. Lauti. I give the question and answer time to the moderator. The time and screen is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Shari. You highlight and emphasis on what the previous presenters have before. So we will have I hope we have a lively discussion in the question and answer session. And Ibu Shari has explained to us that the issue of ASEAN, the issue of bilateral relations between Indonesia and Cambodia is a central, vital, and significant. Of course, we'll have a question and answer session now. So if the audience or participants in the online from YouTube or Zoom have a questions, you will have your opportunity now. But we have a list of questions already before during the registration. So first, I would like to project or ask this question to Dr. Van Aret. There is a question for Dr. Van Aret. Cambodia had been praised for its early efforts in the pandemic in 2020. So in your opinion, how's the government handle the situation now in the connection to the preparation to open Cambodia for international tourism? And with tourism being critical to Cambodia's GDP and a key driver to growth, air bridges and travel bubbles would do a great deal to improve not only the kingdoms, but also the region's economic recovery. Can you discuss it if there is any special ASEAN travel privileges? This is also, the second question is also directed to Mr. Whitlian. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Actually, within the context of ASEAN, we have been discussing a travel bubble for some time because we wish to resume intra-regional travel as soon as possible in order to revive the economy, especially to travel and tourism industry and for the business operation. The surge of the pandemic really hit the region very hard this time with the new variants from India in particular, and it seems that the outbreak is very difficult to be contained. So one of the best effective ways to deal with this emerging situation is to promote a mass vaccination. Mass vaccination meaning you have to vaccinate at least 80% of your population so that you can build herd immunity. And Cambodia is one of the leadings in Southeast Asia after Singapore when it comes to vaccination rollout. With now, I think already reached about 30% of the targeted population have been vaccinated. So that is a positive sign. So hopefully in the next few months, when millions of more doses are coming, then they can have 50% of targeted population vaccinated in a short time frame. And then by the end of this year, we'll reach about 70 to 80%. So in that case, I think we are safe to travel within the country and also within the region. And yesterday, 2 days ago, ASEAN China also discussed the vaccine passport. So that is, it's a new initiative within the region, and I've been here for some time. Europe, US, Japan have been discussing vaccine passport for some time, but also there's concern with it comes to discrimination or exclusion, right? For those who have not vaccinated, they are discriminated when it comes to travel. So we need to be more inclusive, fair and just to everyone in this vaccination passport. So that's why we need to speed up the vaccination to every layers of our societies, especially the vulnerable groups. So, so I think by the end of this year, I'm quite optimistic that perhaps travel bubble within ASEAN can be implemented and tourism industry start to revive by the end of this year, slowly revive. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banaret. And Mr. Whitling, you have a response for the question of the how does Cambodia preparation to open international tourism and gradual to the economic recovery, post-pandemic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For this question, I'm not too far from Dr. Banaret. Government also promoted vaccine to all level of Cambodian people and also the foreigner in Cambodia. In expect that for few months or next year, Cambodia can reopen for the natural tour at Siem Reap or another place, because Cambodia have a lot of place for tourism. So Cambodia try to vaccination to all level of Cambodian people. Just want to promote to another country, to regional, to all the world, so that Cambodia is have the best, but try the best vaccination to all Cambodian people. So the foreigner is maybe fastly one come back to Cambodia. And another one is the government also supply the vaccine to all level. We need to recover our economic from SME to grow up income of Cambodian people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wit Liang. So there is a question for Dr. Eddie. This is related to ASEAN's Indo-Pacific concept. So what are tangible cooperation projects that can be implemented under the AOIP, particularly those that focus on post-pandemic recovery?
Yeah, I think it's a bit difficult actually. So far, the ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific, which is basically focused on 4 principles. Yeah, the first one is the connection between Pacific and Indian Ocean, and then the principles of the cooperation instead of rivalry, and the focus on economic development and maritime domain awareness. I think we can pick up, in terms of the economic collaborations. I think the COVID-19, have created a lot of troubles, difficulties, and especially, in the economic life of many nations, in the world. So ASEAN need to come up, with a specific project, for example, how to strengthen the so-called medium-sized economy, and how to, empowering, the people, and especially, for example, in terms of digital economy, and how to, to create the so-called economic digital corridor among the small and medium-sized economy in ASEAN, because our market actually is really, really big. Indonesia economy is very much actually helped or assisted, by the contributions of the small and medium economy, not the, the big enterprise. So this actually the homeworks of, the Minister of Economy is also the what do you call it? The economic planning board or development. I think ASEAN Minister for Economic need to have a special meeting, on how to, translate the so-called, Asia outlook in the Pacific, especially in terms of economic development in facing, the COVID-19. And I would like to stress here the need for empowering, strengthening, the medium-sized and small-sized economy. And this is actually a big market. And of course, the problems now is the physical attendance or meeting is really still difficult. All countries, all governments now is facing, with the so-called how do you call it? The competition between the economic interest and health. Which one is going to be prioritized? It's not easy because sometimes, people have to choose, between the life and death, and sometimes, between a good life and a bad life. So this is basically the problems now. Some countries are really brave enough, for example, United States, and some countries now are free not to use masks, and they open and they border and so on and so forth. But I think the wave number 3 or the third wave of COVID with the new variants, of the virus, will be, very, very dangerous if we are, not careful. And I think it's better for us actually to build worst case scenario instead of, good expectations, very soon. I think worst case scenario is the best way of thinking, in light of this current pandemic, because everything is still unpredictable. And that's it so far. So my stress is basically the economic, medium and small size economy, digitalized, and the ASEAN minister need to have a conference special meeting, on that particular issues, and how to connect, the small markets in, a very large sections, of ASEAN countries. There are so many local economics actually, in Cambodia, in Indonesia, especially because we are very, very big, from Aceh to Jayapura, and mainland Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and so on and so forth. With population, how many now? Population, is it 700? I think it's now 700 million, right? So it's bigger, it's bigger than European Union in terms of the size of population. So why don't have we, how do you call it, empower all of this economy. So actually the potential is there, but of course the challenge is also at the same time is out there. So thanks very much, Ibu.
Thank you, Dr. Eddie. So if any question from the audience here, I will give the 1 or 2 opportunities probably. Is there any question? No? Okay, so I would like to read one question in the chat room. So the question is, ASEAN countries seem to be still focusing on, sorry, so there is a, okay. So ASEAN is still focusing on the, sorry, there is a technical problem here. Okay. I will forward with the other question first. So one of the Cambodia's foreign policy objectives is to provide equal economic opportunities. And however, China poses some risk and constraints for the country to make this happen. Is there any effective way for Cambodia to tackle this problem? So this is a question probably that can be responded by Dr. Vanaret.
Thank you very much for the question. This is the very popular question among Cambodian observers and those interested in Cambodian foreign policy. As a small state, we have no choice but to diversify our partnerships. And we don't have a privilege to make a mistake. Major power or superpower, they can make mistake and they still survive. But for small state, once they make mistake, I don't think they can survive. Maybe they will no longer exist in the map, in the world map. And this is a case of Champa in the past and different Cambodia or Khmer Empire that collapsed. That is the history. So we cannot have a mistake in our foreign policy. So that's why diversification and hedging have been amplified and stressed. But implementing this policy is not easy within the context of geopolitical rivalries. China, yes, it is one of the key partners, economic partners, strategic partners, but it's not the only country, right? If you look at the strategic partnership of Cambodia, they expanded to Japan. So we have 2 strategic partners. FTA, of course, first with China, but they also have another one with South Korea. In terms of partnership building, they're exploring building partnership also with Australia, India, Russia, and several other European countries. And ASEAN have been perceived as a shield. If you read some of the remarks of the Cambodian policymakers, they use the word shield, ASEAN as a shield to protect Cambodian interests, to advance Cambodian interests. Because as a small state, you cannot confront the pressure from superpower alone. You need to join a club of others, of small states like ASEAN, to help each other. Because traditionally and naturally, superpower, I think they have their own interests and intentions. So, and most of the time, I think the small state become their tools. And Cambodia have experienced in the past. So I don't think Cambodia is willing to become a puppet or a tool or any major power. It's a natural thing. Small state in, let's say, the Pacific Island with a few thousand population also strive to gain independence and sovereignty. So nothing, trust me, nothing is more valuable than independence. And people, struggle and fought for independence. So that is a natural things, and it's a basic foundation and survival of the state. So of course, there's some risks, but trust me, I think Cambodian foreign policy is on the path toward more diversification and hedging. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vanaret. In your opinion, Dr. Vanaret, because this is related to the previous question, is there, on your opinion, how Cambodia can possibly dispel the perception of being a Chinese proxy? Because this is like a popular questions here, lingering among yes, Cambodians. How foreigners' perception of Cambodia. So, in your opinion, how can Cambodia dispel this, negative perception?
I think, thanks for the question. I think actions matter than more important than words. So we need to see the real actions on the grounds. Because when it comes to public opinion perception, Cambodia very weak as a small country, no much resources to have a massive public diplomacy campaign to explain to the public, even the media. We don't have English television. Of course, we have English newspaper, but how many people outside Cambodia read English newspaper in Cambodia? Of course, Jakarta Post is, people in the region read Jakarta Post, but I don't think many people outside Cambodia read English newspaper in Cambodia, right? So, I think we need to show concrete action, concrete steps, and our strategic narratives also important that we need to send a clear message. Consistent and clear message are very important in this regard. And of course, as I mentioned, actions matter than words.
Okay, Dr. Vanaret. So next question is to Dr. Eddie. So Dr. Eddie, there is a question for you. In your presentation, you talk about the ASEAN principles. So in your presentation, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned and comparing ASEAN to African Union. In the case like Myanmar, African Union has a policy to freeze the country that become an undemocratic country, but ASEAN seems cannot do that. So is it possible for ASEAN to change the policy and principles?
I think it's very difficult for ASEAN to change their principles, to change the foundation of ASEAN, simply because ASEAN is very much intergovernmental in nature. It's always, go with the so-called the principle of the lowest common denominator. And we also understand from the very beginning that the differences of the interest, differences in political system, economic system, and so on and so forth are so huge. So basically, what ASEAN, try to do is always the first and very fundamental is in the case of Myanmar, for example, and also outside. In other cases, for example, Rohingya, for example. We always, especially Indonesia, always stress, the importance of the protections of the civilian. That's the first principle. We are not going to the so-called intervene, the domestic affairs. And secondly, we also try to facilitate the so-called national dialogues. So it's not going to dictate, the country. This is the ASEAN principle. So I had a chance actually and some opportunities to talk to the decision makers, in Jakarta. over the issue with many friends at your office, actually at the Foreign Ministry of the Republic of Indonesia. And the fact that we do not put pressures, on Myanmar is simply because it can break up ASEAN. ASEAN can break up. So we respect, the so-called sovereignty, but at the same time, we also, raise concerns, on the issue of humanitarians, the issue of, the protection of the civilians. We need to, for example, to support the so-called peaceful solution and so on and so forth. That is simply because of the very nature of ASEAN from the very beginning. Because if you look at, for example, the variety of the economic system, from the very liberal, very open, just like Singapore, for example, and Malaysia to some extent, and and other economic system like Laos, Cambodia, and to some extent, some part of ASEAN, the political system very democratic, and sometimes is too much. Just like Indonesia, for example. Yeah, we are very free. Everybody can criticize the president directly. Everybody can write a paper, articles, on on a newspaper, and the live coverage, on television and so on. That is very democratic. But at the same time, we also also see some countries who are actually still in the stakes of democratic development, and so on and so forth. So that is the problem. So thank you very much, Ibu.
Thank you, Dr. Eddie. So we still have like okay, we'll still have like 20 minutes before ending the question and answer session. So if there is any online participant in Zoom would like to directly ask a question or 2 questions or 3 questions probably to the panelists. Is there any question from is there any question? I'm going once, going twice.
Can I?
Oh, okay, sure, Pak Edi.
Yeah. I would like to thanks to Sari actually, Sari's comments and some some line of arguments. Yeah, so I just would like to add some point is it's always difficult for any ASEAN chairman and also ASEAN leaders to create the balance, to be honest, the national interest and the associations. And in the past, we saw how Indonesia, launched the so-called two-pronged strategy or two-pronged policy during the Indo-China War. And at the same time, we also, in the name of ASEAN solidarity, we come up with very firm stance of ASEAN's, on the Cambodia problems, issues at the time. But at the same time, we also very close to Vietnam. And it was very close to Vietnam because, at the time, we still, saw the threat from the north. Yeah, threat from so balancing, between, how to face the threat, and at the same time, we have the solidarity. We need to create the solidarity with Thailand at the time. So striking the balance is really the key. And the second point that you raised, which was on the military exercise and training and educations, and in the context of ASEAN, actually all of them were put under the big umbrella of the so-called consistent CBM. We need to still actually we still need to establish the so-called confidence building measures. And if two military relations, can be developed, can be, how do you call it, further, strengthened, then it can contribute to the so-called peacekeeping, in the region, because we have the same, how do you call it, same perceptions, and so on and so on. So it's basically a big umbrella of the CBM in the military realm. And the third point, and this is my last, to be honest, the final statement. from the academic point of view, and I think we can debate this perspective, and I think we also need to have special research with the special case. Yeah, economy and security, yeah, can have mutual relations or interactions, but at the same time they can go independently of each other. It has nothing to do, sometimes a good political relation, it has something to do with economy. But at the same time, it has nothing to do with economy. For example, China and Taiwan, they have very close contact. They have a lot of political, economic investment in mainland China. But politically and in security, in the field of security, they are actually enemies. But we can also see two countries or more countries, they have very good political cooperation, but not good in economy. For example, European Union and United States. So economy, they find their own word. Politics also at the same time. But if they can combine this, of course, it is much better. But we cannot assume that good political and security relationship and the same time is a good economic relationship and the vice versa. Yeah, so it's just like, in the case of Taiwan and China. Yeah, so that is really a challenge actually for the researchers and academicians, to find the fine balance, between the two realm or the two words. So thank you very much, Ibu. That's the final one for me.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I add some?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Okay, thank you. I just want a little bit note related to balance between among ASEAN member states. So ASEAN is too long time ago established. Until now, the gap between low income and high income of among member states still the problem. Cannot get solve the issue. Another one I want to propose. So right now, the pandemic of COVID-19 is all the problem in the region and the world. Until today have a lot of vaccine company. So ASEAN in among 10 states. So can we try to share or to negotiate with the owner of vaccine to share technology to produce in Asian country? Or we can do anything for ASEAN chairman. So this one is very interesting for all. We need to the low price, or we need to supplier to provide at the time when we need. So we order from another country, another Europe, US. So it's a long time to arrive. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wit Liang. And there is a question about the rising tension in the South China Sea. So this is the question to Dr. Van Aert as well as Mr. Wit Liang. So what is your insight of Cambodia's chairmanship to ease and cooling down the tension in South China Sea? And the second question is also to Dr. Van Aert and Mr. Wit Liang as well. So yeah, ASEAN leaders agreed to adopt AOIP for a peaceful and prosperous region. So how do you see Cambodia's important roles as chairman in 2022 to support and implement this AOIP?
Thanks for all those very difficult, tough questions. South China Sea is the most complex chronic issue of should not expect to see solution in the near term. We need to look at the issue from a long-term perspective, right? And the conclusion of the COC is just one of the means and mechanism to sustain peace and stability in the region. Most importantly, I think they need to keep talking, and ASEAN provide platform for not only talk shop, because talk very important to build trust. How can you build trust and confidence if you don't talk? So as long as we keep talking, I think things can be managed somehow. And Cambodia chairmanship, the role of a chair of ASEAN is to represent ASEAN interests, not national interests, because it is about ASEAN interests, right? So the South China Sea is one of the key issues on the ASEAN agenda, and need to facilitate dialogue and trust building, and hopefully to conclude COC next year. So AOIP, as I said earlier, it is the most important strategic guideline. I call it a strategic guideline, but we need more review and elaboration and activation of these strategic guidelines to make concrete action plans based on these strategic guidelines, right? So that I think Cambodia next year can push forward a more of a concrete action under the AOIP and use it as a connecting bridge, as a bridge to connect all the regional initiatives. The US, Indo-Pacific, Australia, Japan, EU, India, or any others, the Belt and Road Initiative and other regional initiatives. So AOIP can play as a hub or a bridging role in this regard, so that we can promote synergies, complementarities among those initiatives. So this is the role that ASEAN can play, so that we can maintain our centrality in this regard. Thank you.
Mr. Whitliang, probably have a response to these two questions.
Thank you. I will respond one question only, as I was listening and answer this question. For how can I see this through? I think right now it's clear the program. So when Cambodia to chair in 2020, I feel the same role that Cambodia already proposed in 2012, 2012. I think it's the best one, because we don't try to compete with each other during another one is at behind. So just in all the countries in the try the best each other, and Asian community just can follow and bravo if those countries can be so. We cannot develop COC at early time, because right now China, US is being compared and in their location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we still have like 5 minutes, right? Okay, 5 minutes. So there is still one question. This is regarding to the Myanmar issues, like a hot stone issues of ASEAN. So the audience would like to know about Cambodia's policy regarding Myanmar's particularly on the refugee. How does Cambodia respond to this plight of refugees? Probably this question to Dr. Panaret and Mr. Whitliang. Thank you.
Thank you again. It is very interesting but difficult questions. I think we have very engaged audience today. Really grateful for that. It's clear that Cambodia has strong interest and willingness to support the people of Myanmar in any possible ways, either through the humanitarian support under the framework of ASEAN or under the framework of bilateral cooperations. Because at the end of the day, it's about the people of Myanmar. we need to take care of each other as a ASEAN citizen, so to speak. So you know, seeing people killed by the armed forces is quite sad and very something that we cannot accept as a human being. As human being, we have the right to live, right to express our opinion. So that is a basic needs of a human being across a different country, culture, and political system. It's the basic needs. It's the need to live in a peaceful environment and the need to express opinion peacefully. So I think Cambodia will try to find way together with Indonesia and ASEAN in order to help Myanmar to restore normalcy, at least to end the violence. When it comes to the refugees, it depends on the request of the Myanmar or the United Nations refugees commissions, UNHCR and other ASEAN mechanisms. But so far, I think Thailand play a critical role in supporting the refugee because it is the immediate neighbor there. So I think if anything that Cambodia can offer to support, I think when it comes to the refugees, support the rights and dignity of refugees, I think Cambodia are willing to do it as well. So so I think your interest and your participation in this very important because it is about our regional issue and we need to care about each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Banaret. Mr. Whitlam.
Thank you, and come back again. About Myanmar, as I mentioned in my presentation, Cambodia is also proposed a within policy of Prime Minister Hun Sen that we suggest when meeting at Jakarta. But I think until 2022, Cambodia will be chair, but Cambodia still cannot do nothing if inter-government of Myanmar not welcome. So between the military and Aung San Suu Kyi must personally try the best way to calm down the pressure in the country, the first. And after have that issue, so Cambodia can propose in ASEAN or another chairman next will be proposed. So this is the best choice. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Whitlam. Probably there is, we still have like 2 minutes, right? 2 minutes left. So I would like to use this opportunity to ask each panelist and or as well as discussant if you have like a closing statement before we end this session. Dr. Eddie, please. You're still mute, Pak Eddie.
Okay, thanks very much. Let me go back to my topic as requested by the organizer. I think one of the most important things that Cambodia need to do, as a next chairman of ASEAN is against, this is a classical issue. This is a classical problem facing ASEAN in the history of the ASEAN since 1967 up until now. First one is, of course, ASEAN cannot be closed from the so-called interaction with external powers. So our duty is how to accommodate the presence and the interests of the external power, and ASEAN need to create the modality, to have interactions, with all of them. So that's the first one. Secondly, is in related to point number one is ASEAN will always be challenged, by the so-called the wave of broader regionalisms, because we cannot live in a closed regions, and our region is very open. It's not only in terms of geographical characteristic, but also very open to, the interactions with all of them. So broader regionalism is always a challenge. That means, we have a duty, we have tasks, to to maintain the so-called ASEAN centrality. And that is, my two main points, as a closing remarks, as long as my topic, the so-called ASEAN chairmanships, is concerned. So thank you very much, Ibu.
Thank you, Dr. Eddie. So, Dr. Wanaret, you have a closing statement?
Thank you to our Indonesian friends. You have our trust and respect to lead ASEAN to a new height.
Okay.
So we respect you and we trust you.
Thanks.
To our Cambodian friends, your participation in foreign policy is very important. And we encourage you to read more and to participate more in the discussion on Cambodian foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wanaret. And Mr. Whitliang, if you have a closing statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For ASEAN 2022, I think Cambodia will be promote and organize the best agenda that all member states can also welcome, and then can propose with the sustainable in ASEAN among member states. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And last, Ibu Shari, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will make a comment about COVID-19 in ASEAN. And COVID-19 is something that ASEAN still has to face in the near future, of course, in 2022, especially when the Cambodia in 2022 will be the chairmanship of ASEAN. And we need to work collaboratively rather than individually, particularly with regard to a regional response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the face of COVID-19 storm, it is not the time for ASEAN members to adopt protectionism and nationalism. Rather, ASEAN must support and embrace regionalism and multilateralism by constructively and genuinely working together to achieve common goals and realize the ASEAN has one community vision. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Shari. So we are now in the closing session. Excellencies, Ambassador Sudirman Haseng, distinguished co-hosts, panelists, and discussants, ladies and gentlemen, our audience and participants, both in the room as well as in the Zoom and YouTube. Thank you very much, particularly to our panelists, Mr. Whitliang, Dr. Eddie Prasetyono, Dr. Chiang Wanaret, and Ms. Shari Charlotte Patipailohi for your presentation and lively discussion today. To our co-hosts, Universitas Diponegoro, thank you for a great collaboration. And for the audience, thank you for your active participation in this discussion panel. So the organizer will have in the chat room where you can access your certificate. And thank you once again, and see you at the next event of the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in Phnom Penh. Good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkuncuran.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Pak Ambassador, Ibu Moderator, Sari, Pak Martin.
Baik, Pak.
And then Mr. Leang, terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Time I will visit Cambodia again. Yeah, because of COVID. Yeah, it's already 2 years I have not been. Okay, so thank you. See you.
Thank you. See you, Mr. Eddie, Mr. Whitliang, Mr. Chang Panaris. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you.